Love, love, until I feel the breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Roger McWhinney. He's the ministry coordinator of St. Benedict's Church. He was sharing last week about his faith and will continue to do so, and about same-sex marriage. Hello, welcome back.
Thank you.
Roger, you shared a little bit about your faith story last week. Would you also share about briefly about that and how you got into ministry?
Yeah, sure. You know, as a child, one of my aspirations for life and what I might do with my life was Christian ministry. And I remember sharing that with my dad, and he sort of said to me, "Oh, don't get too locked into that, you know, don't get into a sort of a one-track mind thing." And I sort of heard that as him saying, you know, you're not suited to that, and you shouldn't be in that. But then after I came into the baptism in the Holy Spirit, I had a renewed desire to be involved in ministry, to be somehow ministering with God. So I went and did a theology degree. And I was about 6 weeks into that theology degree, and I started to have real doubts about what I was doing this for. What you know?
I see.
Here I am, a Catholic, I'm a layman, I'm a married man, I've got children. What do I think I'm going to achieve? You know, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I went on a 4-day fast. I went without food for 4 days.
Wow, that's
and
a long
prayed,
time.
seeking the Lord to see whether I was on the right track and what I was doing. And at the end of that 4 days, the Lord spoke to me from Scripture. I just had a sense to read Ezekiel chapter 3 and verse 1. And I thought, is that you, God? And if it is, I don't know what Ezekiel 3 verse 1 says. So I looked it up and I read it, and it said this. He then said, "Son of man, eat what you see. Eat this scroll, then go and speak to my people."
Oh.
And I thought, oh, eat this scroll. I think that's studying the Word of God as I'm doing in this theological college. And then go speak to my people. Well, I don't know what that means. So I finished that degree. I went and did 3 years of study full-time, worked part-time at a variety of jobs and all sorts of things. And then I finished that degree, and about 12 months later I was given an opportunity with what's now the Disciples of Jesus community, to be involved in leadership and in regularly speaking and teaching, to God's people. So, so that's how I got involved.
Yes, and you found it very life-giving?
I found that, the real sense of fulfilment of this is what I was meant to do in my life.
And the area that you ran a workshop recently on same-sex marriage.
Yeah, well, I didn't run it, but I participated in the workshop.
Yeah.
There was about 9 of us got together, looking at marriage in the light of the postal survey on same-sex marriage, and we put a number of arguments together that we thought needed to be spoken to people who were perhaps ambivalent, you know, wondering, am I for or against this proposal? Should I vote yes? Should I vote no? We don't want to try and beat people over the head, people who are sincerely believing that yes is the right answer. There's no point in you getting involved in arguments with them. But people who are wondering what the right answer is, we need to be involved, Christians need to be involved in conversations with them. So we put together a number of points that we thought would be good arguments to present to people about marriage and what it really is, and what people who are in same-sex unions are really about.
Yes. I think the general public, the ones who are not believers, tend to think that Christians or Catholics are homophobic or condemning of people with same-sex attraction.
Well, I said last week that we're not. I'm not homophobic. As I understand homophobia, it's the fear that I may be secretly homosexual myself or same-sex attracted, and therefore I'm stridently against homosexual people, stridently against same-sex attracted people, as a defence mechanism from looking at myself. Now, I'm not against same-sex attracted people, and neither of the people that were in this working group. We have friends who are same-sex attracted. We love them, we care for them. They're part of our life. The church is not opposed and is not homophobic or bigoted in its approach. It has that reputation, but it's actually a false label that's being given to Christians.
So what do you see it as a bad thing for society?
I think the best thing for the flourishing of society, for the flourishing of people in society, is heterosexual marriage, the conjugal union of the man and the woman, which produces children, which is raised as a family. I think that's the best model. There's problems with families, there's no doubt about that. There's problems in families. But the alternative, I think, is less life-giving than the family. It has less potential for bringing about the full flourishing of the human person.
I mean, I see, studying, when I was studying counselling, I suppose there's the masculine and feminine, it's important for a child being, on a psychological level. Yeah, which seems to help a child flourish more. So with your involvement, you gave a talk with some points.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
I brought out the points that that we had come to in the workshop that we'd had, and we touched on those a little bit last week, and I've touched on them again today. But
so what I might do is after the break we'll ask you some questions about the points.
Okay.
You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us and we'll be back after the Welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Roger McWhinney. He's the ministry coordinator at St. Benedict's Church. Welcome back, Roger.
Thanks again, Geraldine.
We were talking about something quite controversial, especially in Victoria, the last few weeks, about the marriage and same-sex marriage. In that area, do you think that marriage is only about two individuals?
Marriage is really, I was saying just before we had the break, is about society. Marriage is about more than just the two individuals who are involved. There's a lot of focus in our current Western culture on the individual and the rights of the individual, but there's an important aspect to marriage for society, that for the stability and the strength of society, there should be marriages which are producing children, which are living as family, which are contributing to the society, and which are in themselves flourishing so that the society that we live in can flourish. So it's a big philosophical issue involved in this question about same-sex unions.
Yes, I mean, me being a single for most of my life, and also running a singles ministry, I would have to say that to some extent I believe what you're saying, because I think the singles, we suffer a lot of loneliness, and we do somehow try to create a sense of community or family in our small groups and things like that.
Yeah.
And
There's a hunger and a need for family relationships. You know, there's the bigger question too in our society of the extended family. And when you introduce a child into a same-sex union, you're cutting that child off from grandparents, uncles, aunties, all that wider extended family, cousins that they need to relate to. So you're depriving the child of a normal family situation which is healthy for the child. You know, it takes more than two people to raise a child. It takes a village. And that village in our culture has been the extended family. And that's a very valuable thing for the proper functioning and raising of children and bringing them to a mature adult life.
yes, I mean, there is a lot of breakdown in family today, and there are also many good same-sex relationship children growing up. I mean, there is some, I don't know the research, but yeah.
There are, but that doesn't, for that to happen doesn't necessitate marriage. You don't have to then change the law and change the basic structure of society to accommodate those unions. If there are, and there are same-sex unions that are raising children and the children are loved and they're receiving a good love, a healthy growth and development and all those sorts of things. But you don't have to call that relationship a marriage in order for that to happen, because it's already happening.
They have, you're saying they have the same rights, couples in Melbourne?
In the law, as I understand it, same-sex couples have all the same rights as heterosexual couples. All the same rights, except this one thing, you know, called marriage. They have complete equality in our culture, in our society, at law. So they don't need marriage to be equal.
And what about our the non-Western people say that they will eventually catch up with the Western view of marriage?
Well, that's a harsh judgment on non-Western civilizations. Many of these civilizations are very well developed and greatly advanced. Just because they're not Western doesn't make them backward or ignorant or wrong. You know, there are cultures in Africa and in Asia that are very, very healthy and very, very strong, that have heterosexual marriage enshrined as the basic building block of those cultures. So they don't have to catch up with us.
Yes. How do you see, like how should a Christian approach the same-sex marriage? Like how should we approach our, same-sex couples who are trying to, if we have friends, how should we approach them?
With love and support, and doing all that we can to support them. I think we do have to make a decision in relation to this postal survey which way we're going to vote, yes or no. And I think that as Christians we are really bound to say no, because our no is really a yes to life, a yes to a life of flourishing that's at its fullest potential. And yes is a no. Yes is saying no to what is really the best model for family that we can have.
Yeah. And how will freedom of speech and freedom of religion be affected by this new bill?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I think we've all read anecdotes of the way that where same-sex marriage has been legalised, the effects, the trickle-down effects into culture. there has been big effects on freedom of speech. There's been this whole question of Christians expressing their view that marriage is between a man and a woman being taken to court because they're discriminating against same-sex couples. There's been people in business who've refused to, say, bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple, and they've been taken to court.
Wow. We'll have to take a break now.
Okay.
You've been watching Spirit of Life. We'll be back after the break.
Lord, till I hear much breath of thy Spirit flowing in me. Lord, till I hear much breath of thy Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Roger McWhinney. He's the ministry coordinator of St. Benedict's Church. Welcome back,
Thank
Roger.
you, Geraldine.
Roger, we were talking about an area quite controversial about how Christians could be sued if they didn't serve or get be a celebrant for people with same-sex marriage and all those sort of things.
Yeah.
Were you talking about that would then make people not be able to have freedom of speech? Is that correct?
Well, I think there are trickle-down, you could say, consequences if same-sex marriage becomes law. And we've seen some of that in overseas countries. And the consequences are quite serious. You know, there's freedom of conscience, there's freedom of speech, there's freedom of religion. With anti-discrimination laws and the various court actions that are taken against people, we could see Australia moving towards a totalitarian state rather than a free society. I don't think it's putting too fine a point on it to say that same-sex marriage can't exist in a free society.
Wow. Could you give an example of that or possibility of how that would come into action?
Well, I think the very simple examples would be where I stood up at a community gathering in Disciples of Jesus, and I spoke about what I believe marriage is as a relationship between a man and a woman, and that same-sex union is not a marriage in that case. I think I could be taken to court or taken before whatever the relevant tribunal is. For discriminating against same-sex unions.
Yes, I think something similar happened with Archbishop Porteous, where he wrote about marriage between a man and a woman.
Well, Archbishop Porteous put out a document which was the product of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference on the Catholic Church's teaching on what marriage is. So it was a very inoffensive document that he put out. He was brought up before the Anti-Discrimination Commission, I think it is, in Tasmania, for having circulated that document to children in Catholic schools.
Yeah, and don't they have a right, since they, when a parent brings a child to a Catholic school, don't they have a right to have Catholic values in their school?
Well, I think that should be so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It may be that we got to a stage where there was legislation brought in Catholic schools that they could only teach same-sex teaching, whatever that might be. We see a bit of that in state schools with the Safe Schools, whatever it is, program that's been introduced, where parents don't want their children taught gender fluidity, which is a large part of that Safe School staff. And and having to remove their children from the school to enable them to be taught what they believe is the truth in another school. There was a case in Canada where a father wanted to take his child out of a school that was teaching stuff that he didn't agree with, and it was taken to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And he was refused permission by the court to remove his child from that school. The child had to be taught stuff that he didn't agree with, and that's all a consequence of this same-sex law, same-sex marriage law.
All right. And in that school it was something about the sexuality?
Sexuality,
right.
gender fluidity and all those sorts of things, teaching children that they can make the decision about what their gender is, and not related to what's on their birth certificate. And really, it's destabilising a child's identity, to teach that sort of stuff. It's really disturbing that children would be taught and encouraged to question their sexual identity.
Yeah, I know as a youth worker, often when I was doing my training, they said that for young people, don't give them so many options; they get confused, know, and they're very prone to auto-suggestion. So, and I think that is the challenge, isn't it, for young people?
It's a huge challenge. I think there is already in our society too much of that, and for that to go further and further and further, I don't think that's going to produce a stable, healthy society.
Yes. And so you would see as heterosexual and homosexual as not equivalent. Is that what you would base your understanding?
They're equal but different, Homosexual people have a total equality with heterosexual people at law and in every sort of way.
So the intrinsic value is the same.
The same. There's people of worth and value, people that are entitled to love, entitled to everything that society provides. But they're not the same as a heterosexual person. There is a difference. That has to be accepted. I mean, the origins of same-sex attraction are very questionable. We don't know where that really comes from. How come some people are same-sex attracted? As I said, I think last week, for some people that's a real burden, having same-sex attraction. So, it's a psychological state that the person is in, whether it's a disorder or whether it's something that comes about as a result of their genes, we just don't know. So it's beholden on us in society, the rest of us, to treat people who are same-sex attracted as equally as we would treat people who are heterosexual.
Yes. Well, you certainly brought a very controversial subject, but handled it very well, Roger, and I wish you all the best in your endeavours and and wonderful conversion story too. Thank you so much for being on this interview.
No, thank you, Geraldine.
Goodbye and God bless you.
Okay, thank you.
You've been watching Spirit of Life. Tune in next week. Goodbye.
Bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit.